Have you ever wondered how much of your life has been shaped by thoughts that were never truly yours? Perhaps you wake in the morning and before your feet even touch the floor, your mind has already begun its familiar conversation. There are things to worry about, people to please, problems that have not been solved, decisions you are afraid to make, memories you wish you could change. And somewhere beneath all of this activity, there may be a quiet feeling that you should be further along by now, more certain, more peaceful, more complete. You may look at your life and wonder why, after all the thinking you have done, peace still seems so far away. But what if the answer is not to think more? What if the invitation is to see differently? When we hear the words thinking big, we often imagine making our lives larger. We imagine accomplishing more, becoming more important, reaching some distant place where we will finally feel successful enough, secure enough, or worthy enough. Yet there is another way to understand those words, a quieter way, a spiritual way. Perhaps thinking big has very little to do with making yourself bigger. Perhaps it is about becoming free of everything that has made you feel small. Think about that for a moment. How many times have you made yourself smaller because you were afraid of someone's judgment? How many times have you remained silent because you wanted approval? How many times have you carried an old mistake into a new day and allowed yesterday's version of you to decide what was possible today? This kind of smallness is not a measure of your worth. It is simply what happens when fear becomes louder than awareness. And fear can be very convincing. It tells you that you must control what happens next before you can relax. It tells you that another person's opinion can determine your value. It tells you that because something painful happened before, you should expect it to happen again. It tells you to compare your life with someone else's life and then quietly punish yourself for not being where they are. Eventually, these thoughts can become so familiar that you stop recognizing them as thoughts. They begin to feel like you. I am anxious. I am not enough. I am too old. I missed my chance. I always ruin things. People never understand me. I cannot forgive what happened. My life should have turned out differently. These sentences may pass through the mind so frequently that they begin to resemble an identity. But there is something important to notice here. There is a difference between having a thought and being the thought. There is something within you that can notice your fear. There is something within you that can observe your sadness. There is something within you that knows when the mind is comparing, judging, defending, regretting, or worrying. And if you can observe all of these things, perhaps the deepest part of you is not any of them. This is where the magic begins. Not the magic of getting everything you want. Not the magic of controlling circumstances. Not the magic of escaping every difficult moment. It is the quieter magic of remembering that beneath the restless mind, there is an awareness that does not need to prove itself. Imagine standing beneath a vast evening sky. Clouds move through it. Some are bright and gentle. Others are dark and heavy. A storm may appear. Rain may fall. Thunder may shake the air. Yet the sky itself does not become the storm. The storm passes through the sky. Your thoughts may be something like those clouds. Some thoughts bring joy. Some bring fear. Some carry memories from years ago. Some arrive without invitation and disappear just as quickly. Yet there is an awareness beneath them that remains. You may have spent years trying to rearrange the clouds without ever noticing the sky. And this is understandable. Life teaches us very early to pay attention to what happens outside of us. We learn to notice whether people approve of us. We learn to measure ourselves through grades, appearances, relationships, careers, possessions, praise, criticism, acceptance, and rejection. Little by little, the question, who am I, can quietly become, what do other people think I am? And from there, life can become exhausting. You may find yourself entering a room and immediately wondering how you are being perceived. You may post something and repeatedly check whether anyone responded. You may say yes when your heart is quietly saying no because disappointing someone feels unbearable. You may replay a conversation late at night, wondering whether you said the wrong thing. Nothing dramatic has happened, yet your energy has been handed over to 100 invisible judgments. This is one of the ways the ego creates a small world. The ego is not something you need to hate or destroy. Perhaps it is more helpful to see it as a frightened part of the mind that constantly tries to establish safety through identity. It wants to know where you stand. It wants to know who approves of you. It wants guarantees. It wants certainty. It wants to be right. It wants to protect the image you have built of yourself. And when life refuses to cooperate with that image, suffering begins. Someone criticizes you and you feel diminished. Someone succeeds and suddenly you question your own path. Someone leaves and you wonder whether you were ever worthy of love. A plan falls apart and you begin to believe your entire future has fallen apart with it. But notice what has happened. An event occurred, and then the mind created an identity around the event. There is a difference between saying something did not work out and saying, I am a failure. There is a difference between saying someone chose to leave and saying, I am unlovable. There is a difference between saying, I do not know what happens next, and saying, my future is hopeless. The event may be painful. There is no need to pretend otherwise. Spiritual awareness does not ask you to deny pain. It simply invites you to notice when pain becomes identity. A tree loses its leaves in autumn without deciding that it has failed at being a tree. It does not look toward the tree beside it and ask why that tree still has more leaves. It does not become ashamed of winter. It does not demand that spring arrive tomorrow. It participates in the season it is in. There is something deeply peaceful in that image. Your life also has seasons. There are seasons when you know exactly where you are going, and seasons when the path seems to disappear. There are seasons of companionship and seasons of solitude, seasons of beginnings and endings, seasons when your heart feels open and seasons when simply getting through the day requires tenderness. The suffering often becomes heavier when you decide that the season you are experiencing should not be happening. This should not have ended. I should not feel this way. I should have figured this out already. I should be somewhere else. Notice how often suffering contains the word should have. The present moment says, this is what is here. The frightened mind says, this should not be here. And between those two statements, an enormous amount of inner conflict can arise. Thinking big, spiritually, may begin with releasing that conflict. It may begin when you stop demanding that the present moment prove that your life is going according to plan. There is a different question you can gently ask. Instead of, why is this happening to me? Perhaps you can ask, what is this moment inviting me to see? That question does not blame you for your suffering. It does not suggest that every painful experience happened for some simple reason. Some experiences are genuinely heartbreaking. Some losses leave spaces that words cannot fill. But even in those moments, there may be a place within you that can remain open. You can grieve and still be connected to love. You can be uncertain and still have peace. You can be disappointed and still trust life. You can remember the past without continuing to live inside it. You can have fear without allowing fear to become the author of your future. This is a much larger way of living. Perhaps this is what it means to think big. Not to enlarge the ego, but to move beyond its boundaries. Not to become more impressive, but to become less imprisoned by the need to impress. Not to control more of life, but to discover a deeper trust in life. Not to accumulate more reasons to feel worthy, but to question the belief that your worth was ever missing. There may be a part of you that finds this difficult to accept. The mind may say, but you don't understand what happened to me. And that is a fair response. Your experiences matter. The things that hurt you matter. The moments when you felt abandoned, rejected, misunderstood, or unseen matter. But honoring your pain and building your identity around your pain are not the same thing. You can acknowledge what happened without making it the final definition of who you are. Imagine holding a stone in your hand. At first, it feels manageable. But suppose you decide that because someone gave you this stone many years ago, you must carry it everywhere. You carry it into every relationship, every conversation, every new beginning. You sleep with it beside you. You wake and pick it up again. After many years, the weight feels natural. You may even forget that you are holding anything. Resentment can be like that. So can shame. So can an old story about not being good enough. Eventually, you do not ask, why am I carrying this? You simply say, this is who I am. But what if it isn't? What if you could open your hand? You would not be saying that the stone never existed. You would not be pretending that it never hurt. You would simply be deciding that carrying it is no longer necessary for remembering what happened. There is tremendous freedom in discovering that letting go does not erase the past. It releases the future. And perhaps there are things you are ready to stop carrying. Not because someone else deserves your forgiveness. Not because what happened was acceptable. Not because you need to become spiritually perfect. But because your inner peace matters more than your attachment to the wound. You may begin to notice that much of what you have called yourself is actually a collection of things you have been carrying, other people's expectations, old fears, unresolved conversations, images of who you were supposed to become, memories you keep replaying, judgments you accepted as truth, the need to be understood, the need to be right, the need to know what happens next. And beneath all of these things, something quieter remains. You might call it awareness. You might call it spirit. You might call it your true self. You might simply call it the peaceful presence within you. The name is less important than the experience. There are moments when you have probably felt it already. Perhaps while watching sunlight move through the trees. Perhaps while sitting near the ocean and realizing how small your worries seem beside that endless horizon. Perhaps while holding the hand of someone you love. Perhaps in the silence just before sleep. Perhaps after crying so deeply that there was nothing left to resist. For a brief moment, the story disappeared. You were simply present. You did not need to prove anything. You did not need to become anything. You were alive, aware, and here. There is a reason those moments can feel so peaceful. The ego temporarily becomes quiet. And when the noise becomes quiet, you begin to hear something that was there all along. You begin to sense that peace is not necessarily a destination. It may be your natural state when you stop arguing with yourself. Consider how much energy is spent resisting who you are. You look into the mirror and criticize the person looking back. You think about your age and wish time would move backward. You compare your path with someone who seems further ahead. You remember choices you made when you knew less and judge yourself using the awareness you have today. And then you wonder why you feel tired. Perhaps you are not tired because life is asking too much of you. Perhaps part of your exhaustion comes from carrying an internal argument everywhere you go. The argument says, I should be different. What would happen if, just for a moment, that argument became quiet? Not because you have nothing left to learn, not because there are no changes you wish to make, but because transformation born from self-rejection feels very different from transformation born from love. A garden does not grow because you stand over the soil shouting at the seeds. You create the conditions, you give them light, you give them water, you give them space, and then something within the seed knows what to do. Perhaps there is something within you that also knows. You may not need to force your way into becoming a peaceful person. Perhaps peace is what remains as you gently release what has been covering it. Fear, judgment, comparison, resentment, the endless need for approval. The belief that your past determines your future. The belief that you must earn your right to feel whole. One by one, these layers can begin to loosen. And you may discover something surprising. The person you have been trying so hard to become has been quietly waiting beneath the person you thought you had to be. This is why thinking big is not about adding more. It is often about releasing what is too small to contain who you really are. A fearful identity is too small. A resentful identity is too small. An identity built entirely around your wounds is too small. An identity dependent upon another person's approval is too small. Even the identity that says, I must become extraordinary before I can love myself, is too small. You are invited into something larger, a way of being where love does not depend on agreement, where peace does not depend on certainty, where worth does not depend on achievement, where forgiveness does not depend on an apology, where your relationship with yourself does not depend upon having lived a perfect life. And perhaps this larger awareness is what some people experience as connection with the source. Not necessarily something distant above you, watching and judging, but the quiet intelligence moving through life itself, the intelligence that opens a flower without forcing it, the intelligence that guides a river toward the sea, the intelligence that allows wounds to heal, seasons to change, and morning to arrive without your supervision. You are part of that same life. You have never been separate from it. Maybe the deepest spiritual journey is not about traveling somewhere else. Maybe it is about remembering this. And once you begin remembering, another question appears. If the peaceful awareness within you is already present, why is it so difficult to live from it? Why does the ego become so loud? Why do comparison, fear, control, resentment, and attachment keep pulling you back into the smaller version of yourself? Perhaps because the ego has spent years convincing you that it is protecting you. And to move beyond it, you first have to understand it, not fight it, not judge it, understand it. Because what you understand with awareness no longer has to control you unconsciously. And that is where the next part of this journey begins. If you begin to watch the ego carefully, you may notice something surprising. It is rarely satisfied with the moment exactly as it is. It almost always wants something to be different. It wants someone to behave differently. It wants the future to arrive sooner. It wants the past to have happened another way. It wants certainty where life offers mystery. It wants recognition where there is silence. It wants agreement where there are different points of view. And perhaps most of all, it wants you to believe that once these things change, then you will finally be at peace. This is one of the ego's most convincing promises. When this problem is solved, I will relax. When this person understands me, I will feel better. When I know what is going to happen, I will stop worrying. When I become the person I think I should be, I will finally accept myself. And so peace is continuously postponed. It is placed somewhere in the future, waiting behind a condition. But there is always another condition. You solve one problem and another appears. You receive one answer and another question arises. Someone approves of you today, and tomorrow you wonder whether their approval will remain. You finally gain control of one part of life, and something completely unexpected happens somewhere else. Life keeps moving, and the ego keeps saying, not yet. Perhaps one of the most important spiritual discoveries is recognizing this pattern without condemning yourself for having it. You do not need to declare war on the ego. The moment you say, I must destroy my ego, the ego may simply create a new identity around being more spiritual than everyone else. It can be very subtle. It can feel proud of being humble. It can become attached to being detached. It can judge other people for being judgmental. It can turn spirituality itself into another way of proving that you are special. So perhaps the invitation is gentler. Simply notice. Notice what happens inside you when life does not follow your expectations. Suppose you send a message to someone you care about. Hours pass. There is no reply. Nothing has actually happened beyond the absence of a response. Yet watch how quickly the mind begins creating a story. Did I say something wrong? Are they upset? Maybe they don't care about me. Perhaps I should not have sent that. Then another thought appears. Why are they ignoring me? And anxiety begins changing into resentment. Soon you are not responding to reality. You are responding to a story the mind has constructed around reality. Then the message finally arrives. Sorry, I was busy. And suddenly the entire emotional storm disappears. What changed? For several hours, the external situation remained almost exactly the same. What changed was the meaning your mind gave it. This does not mean your feelings were foolish. It means your feelings were responding to an interpretation. That distinction can create enormous freedom. Because if every thought is treated as truth, the mind becomes a difficult place to live. But when thoughts can be observed, space begins to appear around them. You may notice yourself thinking, they don't care about me. And instead of immediately entering that story, something within you can quietly say, there is a fearful thought appearing. That small shift is awareness. You are no longer standing inside the thought. You are looking at it. Imagine sitting beside a river and watching leaves float downstream. One leaf may carry fear, another may carry anger, another may carry an old memory, another may carry a judgment about someone. You do not need to jump into the river and chase every leaf. You can watch them pass. Thoughts can be approached in the same way. They arrive, they stay for a while, they move, and yet much of our suffering comes from grabbing one thought and saying, this one is me. The ego loves certainty, even painful certainty. I always get abandoned. Nothing ever works for me. People cannot be trusted. I am not the kind of person who can change. These beliefs may hurt, but they also give the ego something familiar to hold. And the familiar can sometimes feel safer than the unknown. This is why change can be uncomfortable even when you genuinely want it. If you have spent many years believing that you must please everyone in order to be loved, what happens when you begin saying no? At first, freedom may not feel like freedom. It may feel like guilt. You may set a healthy boundary and spend the rest of the day wondering whether you were selfish. You may decline an invitation because you need rest and then worry that someone will think less of you. You may stop explaining every decision and suddenly feel exposed. This does not necessarily mean you are doing something wrong. Sometimes discomfort is simply what it feels like when an old identity is losing its authority. The people-pleasing self says, my safety depends on everyone being happy with me. Awareness quietly asks, is that really possible? Can you live honestly and guarantee that no one will ever misunderstand you? Can you follow your heart and make certain that everyone will approve? Can you speak truthfully and control how another person interprets your words? Probably not. And yet think of how much energy can be spent trying. You carefully manage your tone. You soften what you really mean. You apologize for needs that require no apology. You carry responsibility for emotions that belong to someone else. You say yes while resentment quietly grows inside you. Then one day you may realize that you have been trying to purchase peace through approval. But approval is rented peace. It can be withdrawn at any moment. Inner peace is different. It does not require everyone to understand you. It allows another person to have an opinion without turning that opinion into your identity. This is not indifference. It does not mean becoming cold or uncaring. You can listen deeply to another person's perspective. You can admit when you have caused harm. You can learn. You can apologize. You can change. But there is a difference between being open to feedback and surrendering your entire sense of worth to whoever happens to be speaking. Thinking big means creating enough inner space for another person's opinion without allowing that opinion to become the boundary of your life. The same is true of comparison. Comparison has become so ordinary that you may not even notice when it begins. You see someone who seems happier, someone younger, someone more confident, someone whose relationship appears beautiful, someone who seems certain of their purpose, and in a matter of seconds, their life becomes evidence against yours. You may know almost nothing about this person. You do not know what they fear when the room becomes quiet. You do not know what they have lost. You do not know what happens behind the image you are seeing. Yet the mind takes one small window into their life and compares it with the entire landscape of your own. Then it asks, why am I not there? But perhaps your life was never supposed to look like theirs. Walk through a forest and notice how little comparison seems to exist there. The oak does not become discouraged because the pine remains green in winter. The wildflower does not apologize because it is smaller than the tree. The tree growing near the river does not criticize the tree growing on the hillside. Each expression of life participates in its own unfolding. There is no committee deciding which one deserves sunlight. What if you could offer yourself some of that same permission? Your path has its own timing. This does not mean becoming passive or refusing growth. It means allowing growth to come from alignment rather than comparison. There is a great difference between saying, I want to explore what life is asking of me, and saying, I must become like that person so I can finally feel enough. One is curiosity, the other is self-rejection. And self-rejection can disguise itself as ambition for many years. The ego says, become more so you can finally be worthy. The deeper self whispers, remember your worth, and then allow your life to unfold from there. That changes everything. When you stop trying to prove your worth, your choices begin to change. Relationships change. The way you speak to yourself changes. The way you respond to uncertainty changes. Even your relationship with failure changes. Failure is one of the ego's greatest fears because the ego builds identity through outcomes. If something works, it says, I am successful. If something does not work, it says, I am a failure. But life is rarely that simple. Sometimes something falls apart because it was never meant to continue in its current form. Sometimes a closed door redirects your attention toward a path you could not see before. Sometimes what feels like failure is simply life refusing to cooperate with an identity you have outgrown. Think about a relationship that ends. In the beginning, there may be tremendous pain. You remember conversations. You remember ordinary mornings that suddenly seem precious. You wonder what you could have done differently. Perhaps you feel rejected. Perhaps you feel angry. Perhaps you want answers that another person cannot give you. The ego immediately searches for a conclusion. I wasn't enough. They wasted my time. I will never trust again. I need them to regret leaving. These conclusions give pain a structure, but they can also turn temporary heartbreak into a permanent identity. A larger awareness might allow a different possibility. This hurts because I loved. This ending does not erase what I learned. I can grieve without making grief my home. I do not yet understand what this ending is creating space for. Notice the difference. The pain has not been denied. You are simply refusing to build a prison around it. This is the spiritual meaning of thinking big. You allow an experience to be part of your story without demanding that it become the entire story. And nowhere is this more important than in your relationship with the past. The ego has an extraordinary ability to travel backward in time. It can take something that happened 20 years ago and make your body feel as though it is happening this afternoon. Someone betrayed you. Someone embarrassed you. Someone failed to love you in the way you needed. Perhaps a parent did not understand you. Perhaps a friend disappeared when you needed them. Perhaps someone said words you still remember almost perfectly. The event ended long ago, but internally, the conversation may still be happening. You imagine what you should have said. You imagine them finally understanding the damage they caused. You imagine receiving an apology. You imagine proving that you were right. And each time the story is replayed, the emotional wound receives another moment of your present life. This is where forgiveness becomes something much deeper than being nice. Forgiveness can become an act of inner liberation. You do not forgive because the past was acceptable. You forgive because you no longer want the past to occupy the present. Imagine drinking from a cup that contains yesterday's bitterness every morning. Eventually, you might forget that another taste is possible. Forgiveness is setting the cup down. It does not change yesterday. It changes what you carry into today. And sometimes the person you most need to forgive is yourself. This can be much harder. You remember choices you made before you understood what you understand now. Perhaps you stayed too long. Perhaps you left too soon. Perhaps you hurt someone. Perhaps you ignored your intuition. Perhaps fear made a decision for you. Perhaps you wasted years trying to become someone you thought others would accept. And now you look backward with today's awareness and ask yesterday's version of you why they did not know better. But how could they have known what you had not yet learned? The awareness you possess today may have grown partly because of those very experiences. A seed does not criticize itself for not already being a tree. It becomes a tree through the process of becoming. Perhaps you can look at your former self with the same tenderness, not excusing harm, not avoiding responsibility, but recognizing that guilt and wisdom are not the same thing. Guilt says, I should suffer because of who I was. Wisdom says, I can live differently because of what I now understand. One keeps you tied to the past. The other allows the past to become a teacher. This is another place where the ego can become very subtle. Sometimes it would rather punish you forever than allow you to change. Why? Because even a painful identity is still an identity. I am the person who ruined everything. I am the one who made that mistake. I am damaged because of what happened. These stories create boundaries around who you are allowed to become. Awareness gently opens those boundaries. You made mistakes. You are not the mistake. You experienced rejection. You are not rejection. You felt afraid. You are not fear. You lost something. You are not loss. Something ended. You did not end. There is still life moving through you. There is still awareness noticing these words. There is still a place within you capable of choosing love in this moment. And this moment is the only place where transformation can actually occur. Not yesterday, not tomorrow, here, now. The ego does not particularly enjoy the present moment because there is not much identity available here. Identity needs stories. The present moment is simply experience. The warmth of a cup in your hands, the sound of rain, your breath moving in and out, the feeling of your feet touching the ground, a bird outside the window, silence between two thoughts, nothing to prove, nothing to defend, nothing to compare, just life. This is why stillness can initially feel uncomfortable. When you sit quietly, the mind may become louder. It begins presenting unfinished business, plans, memories, fears, things you should have said, things you need to do tomorrow. And you may think, I am terrible at being still. But perhaps the purpose of stillness is not to stop thinking. Perhaps it is to discover that thoughts can exist without controlling you. You sit, a thought arrives. You notice it. It passes, another arrives. You notice that too. And slowly you begin to recognize the space in which thoughts appear. That space does not argue. It does not compare. It does not demand. It simply allows. This may be one of the closest ways to experience what you truly are beneath the ego. Awareness itself. And from awareness, even fear begins to change. Fear is not always the enemy. Sometimes fear is useful. It protects the body. It warns you of danger. It asks for attention. But psychological fear often tries to protect you from events that are not happening. What if I lose everything? What if they leave? What if I make the wrong decision? What if I become ill? What if I end up alone? What if the future does not work out? Notice where these thoughts live. Not here. They live in an imagined future. Your body, however, may respond as though the imagined future is happening now. Your shoulders tighten, your breathing becomes shallow, your stomach contracts, you cannot sleep. You begin trying to solve a future that has not arrived. This is exhausting because imagination has no natural ending. For every what if, the mind can create another. So perhaps the question is not, how do I guarantee that nothing painful will happen? No human being can make that guarantee. A gentler question is, can I trust myself to meet life when life arrives? There is tremendous freedom in that shift. You no longer need to know everything. You only need to be present enough to meet what is here. This is surrender. And surrender is often misunderstood. It does not mean giving up. It does not mean becoming passive. It does not mean refusing to make decisions. Surrender means releasing the demand that life must unfold according to your preferred script before you are willing to be at peace. Imagine a river. You can swim with awareness. You can choose a direction. You can move toward the shore when necessary. But if you spend your entire life demanding that the river flow backward, exhaustion is inevitable. Control is often the attempt to make the river obey the mind. Trust is learning how to move with the water. There may be something in your life right now that you are desperately trying to control. A relationship, a child's future, someone's opinion, a health uncertainty, a decision that has not yet been made, an outcome you deeply want. Perhaps you have convinced yourself that worrying about it is a form of responsibility. If I stop worrying, I won't be prepared. If I let go, everything might fall apart. But ask yourself gently, has worry actually given you control? Or has it simply taken today's peace as payment for tomorrow's uncertainty? You can care without worrying. You can prepare without obsessing. You can love without controlling. You can hope without demanding. You can act without attaching your entire identity to the result. This is a larger way of being, and it requires trust. Not necessarily trust that everything will happen exactly as you want. That would simply be another form of control. It is trust that whatever arrives can become part of your awakening. Trust that you have inner resources you may not yet know you possess. Trust that endings can coexist with beginnings. Trust that uncertainty does not mean abandonment. Trust that life can contain intelligence beyond what the thinking mind can currently understand. Look back at your own life. There may have been moments you once considered disasters that eventually redirected you, a rejection that moved you toward another opportunity, an ending that forced you to meet yourself, a period of loneliness that taught you how deeply you had abandoned your own needs, a disappointment that revealed what actually mattered. At the time, you may not have called these gifts, and perhaps you still would not. Not everything painful needs to be turned into a blessing, but you can recognize that you are more than what happened. Something in you continued, something learned, something softened, something became more aware. That something is worth noticing. It is the part of you that the ego cannot fully explain. The ego measures life through gain and loss. The deeper self may measure life through awakening. The ego asks, what did I get? Awareness asks, what did I discover? The ego asks, did I win? Awareness asks, did I remain connected to love? The ego asks, do they approve of me? Awareness asks, am I living in harmony with what I know inwardly to be true? These are very different ways of moving through the world, and the shift between them may happen quietly. It happens when someone criticizes you and you notice the urge to defend yourself before deciding whether a response is actually necessary. It happens when someone else succeeds and you catch comparison beginning, then remember that another person's light does not diminish yours. It happens when an old memory returns, and instead of feeding it for another hour, you place your attention on the life happening around you. It happens when you are uncertain and choose not to turn uncertainty into catastrophe. It happens when you feel fear and place a gentle hand on your own heart rather than criticizing yourself for being afraid. These moments may appear small, but spiritually, they are enormous. Each one is a moment when awareness becomes larger than habit. And this is where the title begins to reveal its deeper meaning. Thinking big is not thinking more impressive thoughts about yourself. It is creating enough inner space that thoughts no longer imprison you. It is seeing yourself as larger than your fear, larger than your past, larger than another person's judgment, larger than the identity the ego has been protecting. Not larger in importance, larger in awareness. The ocean is not threatened by a wave. The wave rises, it falls, another appears. The ocean remains. Your emotions are waves. Your thoughts are waves. Your successes and failures are waves. Praise and criticism are waves. Youth and aging are waves. Arrival and departure are waves. They matter. They are real experiences. They deserve to be felt. But perhaps you are also the ocean in which they move. When you forget this, every wave feels like the whole world. When you remember it, you can experience the wave without losing yourself inside it. This does not make you detached from life. It may actually allow you to participate more deeply. Because when you are not constantly protecting an identity, you can listen more openly. You can love without needing ownership. You can apologize without feeling destroyed. You can change your mind without believing you have lost. You can allow another person to be different from you. You can say, I don't know. You can rest. You can begin again. The ego interprets these things as vulnerability. The spirit may experience them as freedom. And perhaps one of the greatest freedoms is no longer needing to be right all the time. Think about how many relationships have suffered because two people were more committed to being right than to remaining connected. A small disagreement begins. One person says something, the other person feels misunderstood. Voices change. Old grievances appear. Suddenly, neither person is listening. Both are preparing the next argument. And beneath all the words is a quiet plea. Please confirm that my version of reality is the correct one. What if, in one of those moments, you asked yourself a different question? Would I rather protect my position or understand the person in front of me? There will be times when you need to stand firmly for what matters. Peace does not require abandoning truth, but truth does not always require aggression. Sometimes the most powerful sentence is, help me understand. Sometimes it is, perhaps I was wrong. Sometimes it is, I hear you. Sometimes it is simply silence. Not the silence used to punish, the silence that creates enough space for love to return. This is what happens when the ego is no longer asked to lead every conversation. You begin choosing peace without making yourself powerless. You begin choosing compassion without abandoning boundaries. You begin choosing forgiveness without pretending that harm did not happen. You begin choosing love without needing love to look exactly the way you imagined. And gradually, the identity you have defended for so long becomes less rigid. You begin to understand that you do not need to know who you are in every moment. You can simply be. This can feel almost frightening at first. If you are not your achievements, who are you? If you are not your mistakes, who are you? If you are not your role in the family, your work, your age, your appearance, your relationship status, your reputation, or your history, who are you? The mind wants an answer it can put into words. But perhaps the deepest answer cannot be contained in a sentence. Perhaps it can only be experienced in stillness, in love, in forgiveness. In the moment when you stop resisting yourself. In the moment when you look at another human being and recognize that beneath their defenses, they too are trying to find their way home. And this is where the journey begins to move beyond understanding. It is one thing to recognize the ego. It is another thing to return to the self that existed before all of these identities became so important. There is a place within you that does not need applause. A place that does not grow larger when someone praises you or smaller when someone criticizes you. A place untouched by comparison. A place that knows how to forgive. A place that can surrender without disappearing. A place that can love without demanding guarantees. You have visited this place before, perhaps only for moments. The question now is not how to create it. The question is how to return to it. And that return may require something the ego finds very difficult. You may have to stop asking life to prove that you are safe. You may have to release people who cannot become what you wanted them to be. You may have to forgive versions of yourself you have spent years condemning. You may have to trust a path before you can see where it leads. And most importantly, you may have to discover that the love you have been searching for outside yourself has always been quietly waiting within. That is where we go next. There comes a point in the inner journey when understanding is no longer enough. You may understand why you worry. You may recognize the voice of the ego. You may see how comparison steals your peace and how the past continues to influence the present. You may even understand that another person's judgment does not determine your worth. And still something within you may ask, how do I actually live differently? Perhaps the answer begins not with doing more, but with returning. Returning to the part of you that existed before you learned to measure your worth through other people's eyes. Returning to the quiet awareness beneath the noise. Returning to the place where you do not have to perform, defend, explain, or prove. You are not trying to manufacture a new self. You are remembering the self that was never truly lost. Imagine a lake after a storm. Wind has disturbed the surface. Mud has risen from the bottom. The water looks cloudy, and if you stare into it, you cannot see clearly. You could reach into the lake and desperately try to push the mud back down, but every movement would disturb the water even more. Or you could become still. Eventually, the mud settles on its own. The water becomes clear again. Perhaps your inner life works in a similar way. There are moments when the most loving thing you can do is stop trying to fix yourself. You have spent enough time treating yourself like a problem. You have analyzed your mistakes, replayed conversations, imagined different futures, tried to become more acceptable, tried to eliminate every weakness, tried to understand why you are not always peaceful. But what if peace is not the result of finally repairing every imperfect part of yourself? What if peace begins when you stop declaring war on those parts? There may be fear inside you. Can you sit beside it without becoming it? There may be sadness. Can you allow sadness to move through you without calling yourself broken? There may be regret. Can you listen to what regret has taught you without sentencing yourself to a lifetime of punishment? This is acceptance. Acceptance is not resignation. It is not saying nothing matters. It is not refusing to change. Acceptance simply means you stop fighting reality long enough to meet it honestly. And from that honesty, something softer becomes possible. Forgiveness. Many people wait for forgiveness to feel natural before they offer it. They imagine that one morning they will wake up and no longer feel hurt. Then forgiveness will be easy. But perhaps forgiveness is not an emotion that arrives after pain disappears. Perhaps it is a direction you begin turning toward while some pain is still present. You may think of someone right now whose name changes something inside you. Perhaps your chest tightens. Perhaps an old conversation begins replaying. Perhaps years have passed, yet a part of you still waits for them to understand what they did. You may imagine that forgiveness would somehow release them from responsibility. But forgiveness is not a courtroom. It is an inner decision about what you will continue carrying. Imagine two people connected by a rope. One person hurt the other and walked away long ago. Yet the wounded person continues holding the rope tightly. They think, I cannot let go because what happened was wrong. And perhaps it was wrong. But who is still holding the rope? Who feels the tension in their hands every day? Who is still connected to the event? Forgiveness is not saying the rope never existed. It is opening your hand. You may never receive the apology you hoped for. Some people will never understand how deeply they hurt you. Some may remember the situation differently. Some may never become capable of giving you the closure you want. If your peace depends upon their awakening, you have placed something sacred inside someone else's hands. Perhaps you can gently take it back. You can say inwardly, I do not need you to understand my pain in order for me to heal. There is power in that realization, not the power of superiority, the power of freedom. And forgiveness may need to happen many times. An old memory may return tomorrow. You may feel the anger again. That does not mean you failed. You can release it again and again, each time with a little less resistance. Like leaves falling from a tree in autumn, some things do not need to be ripped away. They can be allowed to fall when they are ready. This is especially true when forgiving yourself. There may be a younger version of you who still lives in your memory. You see the choices that person made and wonder how you could have been so unaware. But consider what would happen if, instead of judging that younger self, you sat beside them. Imagine meeting yourself from 10 or 20 years ago. Look at their face. Notice what they were afraid of. Notice how desperately they wanted love. Notice what they did not yet understand. Would you speak to them the way you speak to yourself now? Would you say, you ruined everything? Or might you say you were doing what you knew how to do with the awareness you had? Perhaps that younger self does not need another judge. Perhaps they need the compassion you now know how to give. You can take responsibility without hatred. You can regret something without becoming regret. You can apologize when an apology is needed and then choose to live differently. This is how the past becomes wisdom rather than identity. A scar is evidence that something happened. It is not evidence that healing was impossible. And as forgiveness loosens your attachment to yesterday, surrender begins opening your relationship with tomorrow. Surrender may be one of the most misunderstood spiritual ideas. We often associate surrender with defeat. But spiritually, surrender may simply mean that you stop insisting that your mind must know exactly how life should unfold. There may be something you want very deeply. Perhaps you want a relationship to heal. Perhaps you want clarity about your purpose. Perhaps you are waiting for an answer. Perhaps you are entering a season of aging that you did not expect to arrive so quickly. Perhaps someone you love is moving in a direction you cannot control. The mind naturally wants certainty. It says, "Tell me how this ends and then I will relax." But life rarely offers that arrangement. Life often asks you to take the next step without seeing the entire staircase. This is where trust enters. Trust does not mean believing that nothing difficult will happen. It means allowing yourself to believe that you do not need to know everything in advance in order to meet life with grace. Think about how you arrived at this moment. There were thousands of events you could never have predicted. People appeared, people left. Plans changed, doors closed. Unexpected conversations redirected you. Things you once wanted desperately became things you were eventually grateful not to receive. Other experiences you never would have chosen became sources of unexpected wisdom. Your mind could not have planned all of this. And yet here you are, breathing, listening, aware, still capable of beginning again. Perhaps the same intelligence that carried you through everything you could not predict before can carry you through what you cannot predict now. You may call this intelligence life. You may call it God. You may call it the source. The word matters less than your relationship with it. For some people, source feels like an infinite loving presence. For others, it is the mysterious intelligence within nature. For others, it is the silence beneath thought. There is no need to force a definition. Simply notice that life is happening through you without your constant management. You are not consciously telling your heart to beat. You are not reminding every cell how to function. You do not instruct a wound how to close. You fall asleep without supervising the world until morning. There is something humbling and peaceful about recognizing how much of life occurs beyond the control of the thinking mind. Perhaps trust begins there. You participate fully, but you do not need to control everything. You choose, but you release your demand for guarantees. You care, but you do not confuse worry with love. You prepare, but you allow the unknown to remain unknown until it becomes known. This is not passivity. It is cooperation with life. Imagine sailing. You cannot command the wind, but you can adjust the sail. Much of suffering comes from standing on the boat, shouting at the wind, "This is not the direction I wanted. This should not be happening. Why has the wind changed?" Meanwhile, the deeper wisdom asks, "Given the wind that is here, how shall I set my sail?" This is intention. Intention is different from control. Control says, "Life must give me this exact outcome." Intention says, "This is the quality of being I choose to bring to whatever life gives me." You can intend to be peaceful without demanding that everyone around you behave peacefully. You can intend to be loving without requiring love to be returned in the form you expect. You can intend to be truthful without controlling whether others agree. You can intend to forgive without knowing whether the memory will ever disappear completely. You can intend to remain connected to your deeper self even while the outer world is changing. This kind of intention is powerful because no one else can take it from you. Suppose you are about to meet someone with whom you have a difficult relationship. The old pattern may already be waiting. You anticipate what they will say. You prepare your defense. You remember previous arguments. Before the conversation even begins, you are carrying every conversation that came before it. What if you paused before entering the room? Not to rehearse what you will say, simply to become still. You might ask yourself, who do I want to be in this moment? Not how can I win, not how can I make them understand, but what would it feel like to remain connected to peace while I speak? Perhaps the conversation will still be difficult. Perhaps you will need to set a boundary. Perhaps you will disagree, but you will be speaking from a different place. The ego enters the room looking for an opponent. Awareness enters looking for truth. Love does not mean allowing people to mistreat you. This is important. Sometimes people confuse spirituality with endless tolerance. They believe that being loving means saying yes to everything, but a peaceful no can contain more love than a resentful yes. A boundary can be an expression of respect for both people. You can walk away without hatred. You can wish someone well without inviting them back into a place where they repeatedly harm you. Forgiveness and access are not the same thing. You can release resentment and still close a door. The difference is what you carry after closing it. Do you carry the person with you in anger every day? Or can you eventually allow the closed door to remain closed while your heart continues forward? This is letting go. And letting go is rarely one dramatic moment. More often, it happens quietly. You stop checking whether someone noticed your absence. You stop rehearsing the argument. You stop imagining the apology. You stop needing them to regret what happened. One morning, you realize several hours have passed without thinking about it. Then one day, an entire afternoon passes. Eventually, the memory remains, but the charge begins to fade. You have not forgotten. You have become larger than the wound. This is thinking big, not creating a grander identity, creating enough space within yourself that pain no longer occupies every room. Love creates this space, but love in the spiritual sense is larger than romance or affection. Love can be a way of seeing. Imagine walking through your day and quietly recognizing that everyone you meet carries an invisible inner world. The impatient person in traffic, the cashier who seems distracted, the family member who never knows how to express emotion, the stranger who appears rude. You do not know what happened before they crossed your path. You do not know what fear they carry. You do not know whom they miss. You do not know what they were told about themselves when they were young. This does not excuse harmful behavior, but it can soften the immediate desire to judge. There is a difference between recognizing that a behavior is unhealthy and deciding that the person performing it has no humanity. The ego reduces people to their worst moment. Love allows complexity. And when you offer this understanding to others, you may begin offering it to yourself. You too are complex. You have moments of wisdom and moments of fear. You have been generous and selfish, patient and impatient, open and defensive. You have known what to do and ignored it. You have also surprised yourself with courage you did not know you possessed. All of this belongs to the human experience. Your true self does not require you to erase your humanity. It invites you to hold your humanity within something larger: awareness, presence, compassion. Perhaps this is what it means to live in harmony with Source. You begin noticing the qualities that seem closest to the deepest intelligence of life. Life gives without asking the tree to repay the sun. The rain falls without deciding which flower deserves water. A river does not refuse to flow because a stone stands in its path. It moves around the stone and continues. There is generosity in nature, adaptability, patience, renewal. You can allow these qualities to become reminders. When you encounter resistance, perhaps you can become more like water. When you feel impatient, perhaps you can remember the tree. No tree pulls on its branches to make spring arrive faster. It trusts a rhythm it cannot see. There may be something in your life that is still a seed. You have been staring at the soil, wondering why nothing is happening. You may even have begun digging it up repeatedly to see whether it is growing. But some transformations occur underground. Some healing happens before you can name it. Some answers are forming while the mind insists that nothing is changing. Trust does not mean, the seed will become exactly what you imagine. It means you allow the process to have its season. This can be especially meaningful as you grow older. Aging can challenge the ego because the ego is deeply attached to form. Appearance changes. Energy changes. Roles change. Children grow. Parents leave. Careers evolve or end. The mirror reflects someone different from the person you remember. The culture may encourage you to resist every sign of time. But what if aging can also become a spiritual invitation? A tree in winter is not less sacred than a tree in spring. Its beauty has simply changed. Perhaps your body changing is not evidence that life is leaving you. Perhaps it can remind you to discover what within you does not age in the same way. The awareness looking through your eyes now may feel strangely familiar. Think of yourself at 10 years old, then at 20, then 30. The body changed. Your opinions changed. Your circumstances changed. Your dreams changed. Yet there is a sense of I am that has accompanied every version. What is that? You do not have to answer intellectually. Just notice it. The witness has been present through every season. Perhaps your true self is closer to that witness than to any temporary role you have played. And when you recognize this, purpose also begins to change. Many people become anxious about purpose because they imagine there is one enormous assignment hidden somewhere in the future. What am I supposed to do with my life? The question can become so heavy that it prevents you from noticing the life already happening. Perhaps purpose is not always a destination. Perhaps purpose can be the quality of consciousness you bring to this moment. If you listen deeply to someone who feels unseen, there is purpose. If you forgive where you once would have attacked, there is purpose. If you bring kindness into a room filled with tension, there is purpose. If you become present with your child, your partner, your friend, or even yourself, there is purpose. If you choose not to pass an old wound into the next generation, there is profound purpose. You do not need an audience for your life to matter. A candle does not ask how many people are watching before it gives light. It simply expresses its nature. Perhaps your deepest purpose is similar, to express what you truly are, not the frightened identity, not the defensive identity, not the image created for approval. The deeper qualities beneath those things: love, peace, compassion, creativity, presence, whatever feels most aligned with the source within you. And strangely, when you stop asking, how can I become important, you may become more available to what is actually important. A conversation, a moment of forgiveness, a quiet act of generosity, an honest boundary, an evening when you finally allow yourself to rest. The ego often overlooks these things because they cannot always be displayed, but the soul may recognize them immediately. There may come a day when you realize that many of the things you once desperately wanted were attempts to obtain a feeling. You wanted recognition because you wanted to feel worthy. You wanted control because you wanted to feel safe. You wanted someone to apologize because you wanted to feel free. You wanted certainty because you wanted peace. What if you began gently practicing those qualities before the external condition changed? Can you offer yourself a little worthiness now? A little safety now? A little freedom now? A little peace now? This is not pretending. It is remembering where these qualities originate. The world can awaken them, reflect them, challenge them, and sometimes seem to take them away. But perhaps their deepest source was never outside you. You have known moments of peace in imperfect circumstances. You have known love after loss. You have laughed while problems remained unsolved. You have felt gratitude during uncertain seasons. These moments reveal something extraordinary. Your inner state is influenced by circumstances, but it is not completely owned by them. There is a doorway inside, and every time you become aware, you approach that doorway. Every time you forgive, it opens a little wider. Every time you surrender what you cannot control, you step closer. Every time you choose love instead of feeding fear, you remember. And perhaps one day you notice that you are no longer searching for yourself in the places where you used to look. You do not search inside another person's approval. You do not search inside your past. You do not search inside comparison. You do not search inside the future version of yourself who finally has everything figured out. You become quiet, and there you are. Not perfect, not finished, not free from every difficult emotion. Simply present, and enough. Maybe this is what you were looking for all along. Not a better identity. Freedom from needing identity to tell you that you belong. You belong because you are here. You are part of life. Part of the same mysterious movement that carries rivers toward oceans and seeds toward sunlight. You do not need to understand the entire mystery to participate in it. You can breathe. You can soften. You can listen. You can release one thing you no longer need. And you can take the next step. There is a beautiful simplicity in returning to yourself. But then comes perhaps the most important question of all. How do you carry this awareness into an ordinary Tuesday morning? How do you remember it when someone irritates you, when plans fall apart, when fear returns, when the phone begins ringing, when responsibilities pile up, when an old wound suddenly opens again? Spiritual understanding becomes transformative when it enters ordinary life, not only in silence, not only in moments of inspiration, but in traffic, in relationships, in uncertainty, in the way you speak to yourself when no one else is listening. You do not need to leave your life to find your true self. The final invitation is to bring your true self into the life you are already living. And perhaps that is where thinking big becomes more than an idea. It becomes a way of being. And so you return to your ordinary life. The morning comes. The phone is there. Responsibilities are waiting. There are people you love and people who challenge you. There are decisions you still have not made. There are questions that still do not have answers. The world has not suddenly arranged itself around your peace. And perhaps that is exactly where this journey becomes real. Because inner peace was never meant to depend on creating a life without difficulty. It was never about reaching a place where no one disappoints you, nothing changes, and uncertainty disappears. It is about discovering a place within yourself that you can return to while life continues to move. You will forget sometimes. You will become impatient. You will compare yourself with someone. You will worry about something that has not happened. An old memory may return unexpectedly. Someone may say something that touches a wound you thought had healed. You may catch yourself trying to control an outcome or seeking approval again. None of this means you have lost your way. The moment you notice, you are already returning. Awareness does not require perfection. It simply asks you to wake up again. Perhaps tomorrow morning, before you reach for your phone, you can give yourself a few quiet moments. Nothing complicated. Just breathe. Notice that you are here. Feel the stillness before the mind begins organizing the day. You do not need to ask for anything. You do not need to solve anything. For a moment, simply experience your own presence. You may quietly remember, I am more than everything I have to do today. There is something deeply healing about beginning the day before the world begins telling you who you need to be. And as the day unfolds, you can practice noticing. Notice when your body tightens. Notice when the mind begins comparing. Notice when you are preparing an argument with someone who is not even in the room. Notice when fear begins writing a story about tomorrow. You do not have to force these thoughts away. You can simply recognize them. There is fear. There is comparison. There is the need for approval. There is the desire to control. And then breathe. That tiny space between awareness and reaction can change the direction of an entire day. You may discover that you do not need to answer every thought. You do not need to defend yourself against every opinion. You do not need to attend every argument your mind invites you into. Sometimes peace is simply choosing not to continue an inner conversation that has already taken enough from you. And gratitude can help you return. Not forced gratitude. Not pretending that everything is wonderful when it is not. A simpler gratitude. The warmth of water on your hands. A meal. A familiar voice. A quiet room. Sunlight appearing on the wall. Your body carrying you through another day. The breath you did not have to earn. Gratitude brings your attention back from the imagined life into the life that is actually here. The ego says, look at what is missing. Gratitude whispers, also notice what remains. Both may be true. Something may be missing, and something beautiful may still remain. You can grieve and be grateful. You can be uncertain and grateful. You can want change and still recognize the sacredness of what is already present. This is not settling for less. It is refusing to postpone your entire experience of being alive. And perhaps there is someone you are still carrying, someone you need to forgive. You do not have to force yourself to feel differently tonight. You might simply begin by saying inwardly, I am willing to stop allowing this pain to define me. That willingness is enough for now. Forgiveness may unfold slowly. The heart has its own seasons. Trust that. And if the person you are carrying is yourself, perhaps you can place your hand over your heart and remember that the person who made those old choices did not possess the awareness you possess today. You can learn without hating the learner. You can take responsibility without building a home inside shame. You can begin again. There is no age at which beginning again becomes spiritually impossible. A new beginning may not mean changing everything outside you. Sometimes the greatest new beginning is a new relationship with what is already here. The same home, the same body, the same responsibilities, the same uncertain future, but a different consciousness meeting them. This is what changes when you stop living entirely from the small identity. You stop asking every circumstance to confirm your worth. You stop expecting every person to protect your peace. You stop requiring the future to guarantee your safety. You begin carrying your center with you. And when you lose contact with it, you return. Again and again. This is practice. You might think of it as tending a garden. You do not plant peace once and expect weeds never to appear. You notice what is growing. You water what you want to strengthen. You gently remove what no longer serves the garden. Some days require more attention than others. But you do not become angry with the earth. You keep tending. Your inner world deserves that same patience. Water gratitude. Water stillness. Water compassion. Water forgiveness. Water the moments when you choose not to react immediately. Water the quiet voice that says you do not have to prove yourself. And be patient with the old patterns. They may have been growing for decades. You do not need to hate them in order to release them. Even fear can be met with tenderness. The next time fear appears, perhaps instead of asking, how do I get rid of this? You can ask, what is this fear trying to protect? Listen. Maybe it fears rejection. Maybe it fears being alone. Maybe it fears losing control. Maybe it fears that you are not enough. And then, rather than allowing fear to drive, you can acknowledge it. I see you, and I do not need you to decide who I am. That is inner leadership. Quiet, compassionate, aware. You are not fighting yourself anymore. And this is where thinking big becomes very different from what you may once have imagined. Thinking big is not standing before the world and declaring how powerful you are. Sometimes thinking big is sitting quietly and realizing you no longer need the world to confirm your power. It is not imagining yourself above other people. It is recognizing that there is no need to stand above anyone. It is not accumulating evidence that you matter. It is remembering that your existence does not require justification. It is not forcing your future to become extraordinary. It is becoming fully available to the extraordinary depth of this moment. The ego wants a larger stage. The true self wants a larger heart. And perhaps that is the entire journey. To become spacious enough inside that life can be life. People can be imperfect. The past can be finished. The future can remain mysterious. You can be misunderstood. You can change your mind. You can grow older. You can lose things. You can begin again. And beneath all of these changing experiences, you can remain connected to something that does not need to be defended. Presence, love, awareness, source. Call it whatever feels natural to you. Perhaps it is simply the deepest part of yourself. The part that becomes visible when fear becomes quiet. And if you want one simple practice to carry from this conversation, let it be the practice of returning. When you notice yourself comparing, return. When you notice yourself trying to control everything, return. When resentment begins replaying yesterday, return. When the mind runs into tomorrow and brings back frightening stories, return. Return to your breath. Return to the body. Return to the present moment. Return to gratitude. Return to love. Return to the awareness that can observe everything without becoming everything. You may have to return 1,000 times. That is all right. Every return is a remembrance. And slowly, something begins changing. Not necessarily the world. You become less interested in winning arguments that cost you peace. Less interested in explaining yourself to people committed to misunderstanding you. Less interested in comparing timelines. Less interested in carrying resentment as proof that you were hurt. You begin protecting your peace without closing your heart. You begin setting boundaries without hatred. You begin loving without ownership. You begin forgiving without forgetting what you learned. You begin trusting without demanding guarantees. And one day, you may realize that the life you wanted to escape has become the very place where you learned how to be free. Not because every problem disappeared, because you stopped making every problem your identity. The waves still come, but you remember the ocean. The clouds still gather, but you remember the sky. Winter still arrives, but you remember that seasons move. Thoughts still appear, but you remember the awareness watching them. And when you remember, you become larger than the temporary experience without needing to deny it. This is the magic. You were never being asked to become bigger than anyone else. You were being invited to become larger than the fear that told you who you were allowed to be. Larger than resentment. Larger than comparison. Larger than yesterday's mistakes. Larger than the opinions of people who could only see you through the limits of their own perception. Not larger through superiority. Larger through love. Perhaps the most beautiful realization is that you have not created anything new. The peaceful awareness you are discovering was already here. It was here when you were afraid. It was here when you were trying desperately to please everyone. It was here during the relationship that ended. It was here when you made the mistake you still regret. It was here when you believed you had lost your direction. Like the sun behind heavy clouds, it was never absent. You simply could not always see it. And perhaps this is why spiritual awakening often feels more like remembering than learning. You remember that you can choose peace. You remember that forgiveness is freedom. You remember that love does not make you weak. You remember that letting go does not mean losing. You remember that uncertainty does not mean you are abandoned. You remember that your value existed before anyone applauded you and remains when no one is watching. You remember that you are not the story the ego has been repeating. You are the awareness hearing the story. And now you can decide whether you wish to continue telling it. Maybe tonight, when everything becomes quiet, you can sit for a moment without trying to improve yourself. No goal, no judgment, no spiritual achievement. Just breathe. Feel the life within you. Notice how little you need in this exact moment. Perhaps there is a problem waiting for tomorrow. Let tomorrow hold it for tonight. Perhaps there is something from yesterday that still hurts. Let yesterday rest where it belongs. For this breath, be here. For this moment, allow yourself to be enough. You have spent so much of your life becoming. Maybe you can spend a little time simply being. And in that stillness, perhaps you will recognize something familiar. A quiet presence, a softness, a sense that beneath everything you have been carrying, you are still here. Whole enough to love, whole enough to forgive, whole enough to begin again. You do not need to chase this feeling. You only need to remember the way home. And whenever you forget, life will give you another opportunity to remember. Another breath, another morning, another conversation, another moment in which fear appears and love remains available. This is how a life changes from within, quietly, one moment of awareness at a time. So as you move forward from here, perhaps you do not need to ask, how can I make my life bigger? Ask something gentler. What am I ready to stop carrying? Maybe it is an old judgment. Maybe it is someone else's expectation. Maybe it is resentment. Maybe it is the belief that you are behind. Maybe it is the need to know exactly what comes next. Release what you can. Be patient with what remains. And trust that beneath all of it is a self that has never needed to be earned. That self is not waiting somewhere in the future. It is here. It has always been here. And perhaps the magic of thinking big is simply this. You stop allowing fear to tell you how small you are, and you remember the vastness of the love, peace, and awareness already alive within you. If something in this journey spoke to a part of you that has been waiting to be heard, you are welcome to share your reflection in the comments. Sometimes a few honest words about what you are ready to release can become the beginning of a new relationship with yourself. And if you would like to continue exploring these quiet journeys into awareness, forgiveness, inner peace, and the deeper self, you can subscribe and return whenever you need another reminder. Until then, there is nothing you need to prove, nothing you need to become in this moment. Take one breath, release what you can, trust what you cannot yet see, and remember, you are not becoming who you truly are. You are remembering